were never meant to hear this. There are truths so vile, so corrosive, that even time refuses to remember them. They aren't written in history books. They're whispered, sealed, buried beneath layers of piety, patriotism, and stone. But tonight, you'll hear one. In the cold winter of 1851, a schoolteacher named Elizabeth Hartwell descended into the basement of St. Catherine's Academy, a prestigious institution for orphaned girls in Salem, Massachusetts. What she found shattered every illusion of safety she'd ever believed in. Behind a false wall, she discovered 24 rusted iron beds, each chained to the stone. Shards of innocence littered the floor, a torn doll with no eyes, a blood-streaked ribbon, a cross missing its top arm, and scrawled in childlike desperation on the wall, in what appeared to be blood, "We are still here." What Elizabeth uncovered was never meant to be known. Her report was buried, literally, sealed in a mason jar and hidden behind the Academy's altar. It was only rediscovered in 1987 during renovations, and what followed unraveled one of the darkest, most grotesquely orchestrated cover-ups in American religious history. You've been told that institutions protect the innocent, that churches shelter the lost, that schools elevate the future. But St. Catherine's was none of these things. It was a pipeline designed to erase girls from the face of the earth while feeding something far more sinister. And what makes this horror uniquely American is how completely it was hidden. Think you know evil? Think again. This isn't about ghosts. It's not about spirits. This is about men in high places and women in black habits who turned young girls into currency. It's about a city that looked the other way and a nation that never asked where those girls went. What I'm about to show you is dangerous. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. But if you're still watching, that means something in you, something primal, something defiant is ready. So take a breath, step out of the light. We're going into the dark now, into the basement of a building that still stands, and if you listen closely, you might still hear them. We are still here. They called it a sanctuary. St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies opened its heavy Gothic doors in the fall of 1834, perched like a crow on Gallows Hill Road. The name alone, Gallows, should have been a warning, but no one questioned it. They were too busy applauding the 3 nuns who claimed to rescue orphaned girls from poverty, sin, and despair. Too eager to believe that good still existed in a world blackened by industry and plague. Mother Superior Victoria Whitman, Sister Margaret Collins, Sister Agnes Murphy. To Salem's elite, they were saints. To the church, they were heroes. But to the 24 girls who vanished behind those stone walls, they were something else entirely. Predators. From the moment the girls arrived, they were stripped of identity, their hair cut, their names rewritten in ink. Personal belongings were taken for safekeeping, though they were never returned. Each girl was assigned a number, not for organizational purposes, but for something darker, something transactional. The Academy's pamphlets promised education, safety, and Christian virtue, but no one asked why there were never any letters home, no visits, no graduation ceremonies. Not a single girl had ever been seen again after placement with Christian families. The city didn't notice, or refused to, because you see, these weren't daughters of the wealthy. These were the daughters of factory workers, the unclaimed, the forgotten, girls whose absence could be explained away with a forged letter or a quiet funeral. And inside that academy, the transformation began. What began with soft songs and warm meals quickly hardened. Daily prayers turned into hours of forced kneeling on stone floors. Confession became a tool of surveillance. Punishments weren't just corporal, they were psychological, sleep deprivation, isolation chambers, forced fasting to cleanse the soul, and always the promise that obedience would lead to a better life. But no one got out. No girl ever turned 18 inside those walls, because they weren't being raised to live. They were being prepared to disappear. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. No records were ever filed with the state, no adoption papers, no legal guardianships. The academy was a ghost operation, fully functional yet invisible to oversight, hidden behind layers of religious exemption and public trust. Ask yourself, how could that happen? How could a place exist for 17 years, vanishing girls in plain sight without a single investigation? The answer isn't incompetence, it's complicity. And we're only just beginning. The facade was perfect. Tall arched windows, brick masonry imported from Scotland, rosary gardens blooming with lilies and lavender. From the outside, St. Catherine's looked like salvation carved in stone. And that was no accident. In a city still haunted by the sins of the witch trials, appearances were everything. But like all masks, it was made to hide something monstrous. The academy was not run by nuns. That was the first lie. None of the 3 women were affiliated with the Catholic Church in any formal capacity. Victoria Whitman had never attended seminary. There were no records of Margaret Collins ever taking vows. And Agnes Murphy, her background is a vacuum. No family, no birth certificate, no trace before 1833. They simply appeared, as if summoned. And Salem welcomed them. Because people are desperate to believe in benevolence, especially when the alternative is unthinkable. The church allowed them autonomy because they spoke the right words, quoted scripture, praised chastity. But behind closed doors, they were building a different kind of order, one that didn't serve God, but power. The basement wasn't just a laundry room or a domestic workshop, it was a conversion chamber, a place where girls were remade, shaved, branded, broken. Eyewitness accounts describe rows of narrow beds with restraints bolted to the floor, wooden chairs with iron manacles, a mirrorless bathroom with one-way glass. What kind of education required such tools? The walls were thick, soundproofed. No one outside would hear the screaming. But the girls knew. They whispered to each other in the night, messages scratched under bedposts, sewn into the hems of uniforms, names, warnings, a crude map of the building drawn in blood on the inside of a hidden drawer. Clues that no one would ever find until it was too late. The system inside the academy operated with military precision. Obedience was rewarded with small privileges, extra bread, an hour of sunlight, access to books. Disobedience brought isolation, cold showers, or worse, summons to the 3rd floor. No one came back the same from the 3rd floor. It was off limits, locked at all hours, but the older girls knew. That's where they were tested, evaluated, graded like livestock, not by priests or nuns, but by men in suits who never gave their names. The academy was a storefront, and the product was girls. The 3rd floor had no name. The sisters called it sanctum, but the girls whispered a different word, purgatory. It was always locked, always quiet, no sounds of footsteps, no laughter. Just silence thick as oil. And when a girl was taken there, the others held their breath and watched the hallway like it might bleed. Because they knew, if you went up those stairs, a part of you didn't come back. They were called for examinations. The word itself became a curse. Older girls were taken first, usually around their 14th or 15th birthdays. They would be escorted, always at night, by Sister Agnes. Never a word spoken, just a nod, a flick of the hand, like a butcher selecting the next lamb. Inside the sanctum, records suggest something beyond simple abuse. It wasn't just physical, it was clinical, calculated, ritualistic. Witnesses who later came forward described velvet-covered chairs arranged around a table, a curtain separating the girl from whoever was on the other side, a soft voice asking her to sing, to smile, to turn. And behind that curtain, men, wealthy, well-dressed, often masked, they said they were benefactors, future fathers, patrons of the church. But they were buyers, collectors. They weren't choosing daughters, they were selecting inventory. This wasn't an orphanage, it was a catalogue. Some girls were taken after one visit, others were summoned repeatedly, tested, conditioned, taught how to serve without question. Those who resisted were punished not with beatings, but with disappearance. The academy had a small infirmary, but no doctor was ever seen entering it. The sick didn't return. The defiant didn't return. And those who did return, they were different, quiet, fragile. Some tried to warn the others with trembling hands and broken voices. A few even tried to run, but the woods around Gallows Hill weren't forgiving. One girl, Ruth Delaney, managed to make it 2 miles before she was found face down in a frozen stream. Official cause, accidental drowning. But the bruises on her wrists told a different story. The truth is, this was never about helping girls. It was about supplying demand from men with influence, demand from families who collected secrets like heirlooms. And here's what should terrify you most. These weren't one-time buyers. They were repeat customers. By 1843, the Academy's ledger was filled with false names, fathers who didn't exist, families with no addresses, adoptions with no witnesses. But the money was real. Thick donations from anonymous benefactors, envelopes of cash left at church altars, jewelry, stocks, payment for salvation, or something much darker. And that's when the cracks began to show. Emma Prescott was not a crusader. She wasn't a journalist or a reformer. She was a seamstress, a woman forgotten by history, but she knew something no one else did. The voice of her friend Mary O'Brien, a lullaby sung through a brothel window on a cold Boston morning. Mary had been adopted 3 years earlier. The Academy said she was living in western Massachusetts with a Christian family, but Emma saw her, pale, painted, draped in silk too fine for an orphan, a prisoner behind lace curtains and red velvet walls. That moment, those hollow eyes behind the glass, snapped something inside Emma. It was the first fracture in the Academy's illusion, and once you see the mask slip, you can't look away. Emma wrote a letter. Innocent, curious. Where was Mary? Could they write? The response came from Sister Agnes, polite, sterile, and cold. Mary had requested no contact. The family valued privacy. She was happy now. Moving on. And then came the subtle threat, so delicate most would have missed it. Imagination is a dangerous thing, Miss Prescott. We pray you return your focus to the life God has given you. Most women would have let it go. Emma didn't. 3 months later, she saw Sarah Thompson, another girl adopted from the Academy, being led into a carriage by a man twice her age. Sarah's face was blank, her dress too grown, her movements rehearsed. Emma wrote again, this time with sharper words, demanding clarity. The reply came from Mother Whitman herself, and it wasn't a letter, it was a warning. Thinly veiled threats about reputation, sanity, and the foolishness of meddling in divine affairs, but beneath the civility was venom, and Emma saw it for what it was, a predator protecting its nest. She wasn't just poking a sleeping beast, she was standing inside its den. And the beast was watching. What Emma didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her letters had triggered something ancient and calculated, something that had existed long before St. Catherine's and would exist long after. Because this wasn't just a school, it was a system. It always begins the same way. A society reaches for progress, industry rises, cities expand, but with growth comes waste, and the waste is human. Children with no names, girls with no fathers, the unwanted, the unclaimed, the broken. The system needs a place to put them, somewhere out of sight, out of mind, and that's where places like St. Catherine's thrive. They present as mercy, as refuge. But mercy, when unaccountable, rots into something else entirely. By the late 1840s, the Academy was no longer operating as a charity. It was functioning like a marketplace. Girls weren't being rescued, they were being selected, groomed, packaged, and sold. Some to brothels, some to private patrons, and some vanished into circles so elite, so secretive, their names have never been spoken aloud. And the city, the church, the state, they did nothing, because they weren't blind. They were involved. You see, Emma Prescott thought she was uncovering a local scandal. She was wrong. She had stumbled upon a supply chain, a vertically integrated human pipeline running from Massachusetts to Manhattan, from the orphanage to the parlors of Boston elites, from wooden crosses and gray uniforms to chains of silk and gold in rooms where no laws existed. One of the clients, a man known only as C, had a standing arrangement. Every spring he sent a sealed envelope and a single silver coin engraved with a lamb. In return he received his gift by midsummer. The envelope never had a return address. The sisters never asked questions. But the coin, that was a signature. A token from a deeper network, one that predates the Academy, one that exists to this day. Emma didn't know that when she wrote her third letter. This time she mentioned names, dates, inconsistencies. She said she was planning to visit the Academy herself, said she might speak to a newspaper. That's when the real danger began. Because now she wasn't just a nuisance, she was a threat. And for the first time, they responded not with ink and parchment, but with presence. A stranger began appearing near her boarding house, tall, silent, always watching. Her mail began to arrive opened. Her employer warned her that rumors were circulating about impropriety, about instability. A campaign had begun to erase her. Just like the girls. You must understand, when they decide to erase someone, it doesn't begin with violence. It begins with isolation. Emma Prescott found herself slowly severed from the world. Friends stopped answering letters. Clients withdrew their business. Her landlord, once friendly, began to avoid her eyes. Even the postman refused to deliver her packages in person, leaving them out in the rain as if afraid to knock. The warning was clear: step back or disappear. But Emma didn't. Because by then, it wasn't just about Mary O'Brien or Sarah Thompson. It was about the entire machine, the institution that ate girls and left behind only silence. The more she uncovered, the deeper the pattern went. Dozens of names. No birth records, no adoption papers, no adult sightings. Just absence. And then came the night visit. 3 sharp knocks at her door. Past midnight. No voices, no movement. Just the sound. Knock, knock, knock. As if the wood itself was being judged. She didn't open it. But the next morning she found a dead bird nailed to her doorframe. A robin, wings outstretched, its eyes gouged. A symbol, old, occult. A message: this is your final warning. But instead of fear, Emma felt something else rise within her. Resolve. She packed her few belongings and traveled to Salem under a false name, posing as a distant relative of a girl once adopted by the Academy. She rented a room 2 streets away and began watching, recording, sketching every face that entered and left the grounds, delivery men, local priests, even uniformed officers. And then, one afternoon, she saw her. Catherine Murphy, just 16, supposed to have been placed with a wealthy Catholic family the previous fall, yet here she was, still behind the gates, staring out through the iron bars like a ghost in a cage. That same night, a cloaked figure slipped from the back entrance of the Academy and disappeared to the woods behind Gallows Hill. Emma followed at a distance, her hands shaking, heart hammering. She trailed the figure through the pines until they arrived at a clearing. There in the center was an old stone well. The figure knelt, removed something from its robes, a small object wrapped in cloth, and dropped it into the darkness. No prayer, no words, just the sound of something heavy disappearing into bottomless black. Emma waited until the figure vanished, then she approached the well. Inside, she heard nothing. But later, when the town would excavate it, they would find the bones of 7 girls. And that was just the beginning. Hay had been using the well for years. No one knows how deep it goes, no one dares to measure, but what they pulled from its throat in 1988, after construction crews finally unearthed the Academy's forgotten backyard, shattered any illusions that St. Catherine's had merely been mismanaged. 7 small skeletons, girls aged 12 to 16. No shoes, no burial. Bones curled in fetal position, as if their final moments were spent begging the dark for mercy. Each skeleton bore the same mark, a tiny crucifix carved crudely into the rib from the inside. Not engraved, etched in desperation. Emma Prescott never saw those bones. By the time they were discovered, she'd been gone for over a century. But her journals, found in the false bottom of a dresser at her Boston apartment, told the rest of the story. And it's what she discovered next that changed everything. The girls weren't just being selected by anonymous men. They were being branded, not with fire or ink, but with language, specific prayers, indoctrinations, ritualized routines that stripped the self from the soul. The girls were trained to forget who they were, to obey without hesitation, and to remain silent, no matter what was done to them. It wasn't just grooming, it was programming. Psychological control masked as religious devotion. Each girl was assigned a guardian nun who would monitor behavior, track reactions to punishment, and administer sacrament treatments, a euphemism for hallucinogenic-laced communion wine, sensory deprivation, and prolonged fasting. This wasn't Catholicism. This was behavioral engineering. A system designed to fracture the mind, erase autonomy, and rebuild the subject into a pleasing, docile replica of piety. But not for God, for clients. For the men who came from far away, who gave no names, who paid in favors instead of coin. They weren't there to adopt, they were there to... Emma's journal contained a list, a partial record of transactions. May 3, 1844, 14-year-old G.H. taken by Lord F. of Philadelphia, payment 40 shares in East India trade. July 19, 1846, S.T. delivered to private lodge near Concord. Exchange, judicial leniency in pending case. These weren't adoptions. These were deals, political, economic, social. The academy didn't just serve the church, it served the structure. And that structure is still standing. Structures don't collapse on their own. They're dismantled, brick by brick, truth by truth. Emma knew this, but she also knew that if she went to the authorities, they'd silence her, either with ridicule or something far more permanent. So she chose a different weapon: documentation. She spent the next year posing as a maid, a laundress, even once as a governess, gaining access to homes she suspected were part of the client network. Each visit brought whispers, shadows, and fragments. Letters sealed with wax emblems no one recognized, ledgers with initials and dates that matched the academy's internal calendar, and portraits of young girls with empty expressions painted in fine oil and gold-leafed frames. They were trophies. But not every collector was content to display their purchase. Some wanted secrecy, others experimentation. One home, on the outskirts of Hartford, bore the stench of something unspeakable. Emma found a room behind a false wall, padded and windowless, with journals written by a man who referred to his little lamb as Subject Theta. He believed he could repair the soul through pain, thought he was conducting divine therapy. What he was really doing was trying to destroy God's image in a girl's face. And here's what should burn into your memory. These men were never punished. They weren't banished or exiled. They were promoted: judges, bankers, bishops. They dined with governors, funded churches, shaped policy, and all of them had passed through St. Catherine's in one way or another. Emma's final entries were different, tighter, written in code. She believed she was being followed again, watched from rooftops, trailed through crowds. Her last journal page doesn't end with a period. It ends with a name, just one name, written in a shaking hand: Ephraim Alcott. A deacon, a philanthropist, a man credited with saving dozens of orphanages in the 1850s, celebrated by the church, praised in newspapers, statues erected in his honor. But Emma knew the truth. Alcott wasn't a savior. He was the broker, the one who connected the clients to the sisters, the one who handled the more delicate placements, the one who received the highest payment for the youngest, most obedient girls. And then Emma vanished. No grave, no obituary, just gone, like the girls. Only her journals remained, buried in a wall, forgotten for 140 years, until one mason's hammer cracked the plaster and let the truth back into the light. What happens when a lie outlives everyone who told it? It becomes history. Ephraim Alcott's portrait still hangs in the Massachusetts State House. A marble bust of him sits in the Salem Public Library beneath a plaque that reads, "Champion of the Forgotten." Schoolchildren are taught that he was a man of unmatched virtue, a devout soul who dedicated his fortune to the care of orphans. But not one of those children knows that in his personal safe, recovered in a sealed compartment behind his estate's fireplace, investigators found something else. A black leather book, unlabeled, unnumbered. Inside, 24 pages, each bearing the name of a girl from St. Catherine's. Next to every name, a date, a sum of money, and a brief phrase. Delivered to Providence. Preferred silent. Eyes like porcelain. Obedient. Excellent condition. And next to one, resisted. Disposed. No one in official capacity could explain the book. It was dismissed as a forgery, a fiction, a mistake. The report was buried, just like the girls. But the book was real. It matched Emma Prescott's records with frightening precision, line by line, date by date. It even confirmed the deliveries she'd only suspected. Girls who were never seen again, whose parents had died in fires or fevers or factories, and whose bodies were never found because they were never meant to be. And here's what should chill your soul. Every man listed as a recipient in that ledger had a building named after him. Hospitals, libraries, schools, sanctuaries, monuments to virtue erected on the backs of vanished children. Ask yourself this: how many more rescuers have stained hands? How many institutions today were built with the silence of stolen girls? You think this story is over because it happened in the 1800s, but predators don't vanish, they adapt. Networks don't dissolve, they rebrand. The system that began in places like St. Catherine's never died. It went corporate. It went digital. It went global. And if you're still with me, still watching, then it's time to cross a threshold, because this is where the story stops being about them and starts being about you. Are you ready to see through the veil? If you are, I want you to write this in the comments twice. I was blind, but now I see. Say it twice to break the spell, twice to mark your passage, twice to never forget. The descent continues. You're still here. Good. Because now we begin the part they truly never wanted you to know, where the veil lifts and the past begins to whisper its echoes into the present. After St. Catherine's was officially closed in 1852 under the pretense of financial insolvency, no public investigation followed. No arrests, no trials, no press. The building was purchased by a shell trust with no traceable owners and remained empty for over a decade. But inside, nothing had been removed. Not the beds, not the iron shackles, not the altar beneath which they hid the testimonies, not even the tiny blood-stained ribbons the girls once wore braided into their hair. They left it all there, as if the place was waiting for someone else to continue. And someone did. In 1864, the building reopened as a private rehabilitation home for troubled girls, funded by the St. Cecilia Restoration Society, a group with no formal charter, no public meetings, and no listed board members. The only thing known about the group was that it was backed by several influential New England families, some of whom traced their lineages back to the original founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The cycle began again. New name, new mission, same shadow. The methods evolved. The cloaks became cleaner, the clients more discreet, Instead of carriages, they came in black-windowed coaches. Instead of brothels, they were taken to clinics and private academies in the Berkshires and Catskills. And the system learned to launder its victims more cleanly through paperwork, false death certificates, medical diagnoses. Girls who were too emotional, too curious, or resistant to instruction were quietly listed as mentally unstable and shipped to sanitariums, from which they never returned. But there's something worse, something darker. Documents recovered in a locked drawer by a historian in 1994 included a ritual manuscript titled Via Innocentium, The Way of the Innocents. It detailed a rite involving 24 subjects, sequential trauma exposure, enforced identity erasure, and final initiation through isolation. It wasn't just about control, it was about transformation. A blueprint for psychological death and rebirth as something compliant, beautiful, hollow. The manuscript was written in Latin, but the annotations, modern, in English, in blue ballpoint pen, which means someone was still using it, still running it, somewhere. Maybe not at St. Catherine's anymore, but somewhere else. And the question that must haunt you now is, what if that place is closer than you think? It always moves when exposed. Like smoke slipping through fingers, the system behind St. Catherine's never stays in one place for long. It just migrates, it reinvents, it blends into the new structure of the age, always hidden behind words like reform, care, progress. But the foundation never changes. And if you followed me this far, you already feel it. That itch behind the eyes, that quiet, gnawing realization that this isn't just history, it's design. Let me tell you about what happened in 2003. A small, exclusive boarding school in New Hampshire was quietly closed after an anonymous whistleblower mailed a dossier to a journalist in Boston. That journalist, Daniel Moretti, never published a story. Instead, he disappeared 2 weeks later. His car was found abandoned in the Catskills. Inside, they found a single page from the dossier still in the glove box. It read, "The 24 live again, different uniforms, same chant." That's all. No names, no location, but it was enough for those of us watching the shadows to connect the threads. The same number, the same structure, 24 girls, always 24. The manuscript recovered from St. Catherine's wasn't just a relic, it was an operating manual, a system designed not to educate, but to fragment. To break down identity, strip the self, and reconstruct obedience with mechanical precision. And now it had adapted to the new world, hidden in wellness retreats, elite behavioral camps, and therapeutic academies for troubled teens, funded by private trusts, sanctioned by the state, run by professionals trained in trauma-informed care, and yet the outcomes were the same: no contact, no graduation, no return. Parents were told their daughters chose a new life, that they'd moved abroad, that they joined religious missions, but no photos were ever provided, no phone calls, no proof, just piece of fearings, large donations, sudden career advancements, the rewards of silence. Now let me ask you directly, do you really believe this is coincidence? Or do you feel it now, that invisible architecture shaping the world around you? You were taught to see history as chaos, disconnected, random. But it's not. It's structured, and the structure has a purpose. It doesn't just disappear because the building gets torn down. It infects, and sometimes it inherits you. There's a moment in every descent when you realize the walls around you were never walls at all. They were mirrors. And what's reflected back is not just the past. It's your place within it. Because this story, of the 24 girls, of St. Catherine's, of the hidden rites and the polished men who smiled as they erased souls, is not just a tale of monsters and victims, it's a portrait of a system that depends on everyone else staying asleep. And the cruelest trick it ever pulled was convincing the world it no longer exists. You want proof it does? Look at the headlines no one follows. Look at the institutions that outlive their scandals. Look at the missing children whose files vanish from databases after clerical errors. Look at the powerful men whose names surface briefly, then sink without consequence. It's not that the system is immune to justice. It's that the system owns the definition of justice. Emma Prescott tried to fight it alone, and she lost. But now her work lives on, not just in journals, not just in whispers, but here, in you. Because if you've watched this far, you're not just a viewer. You're a carrier of knowledge they buried, of names they erased, of screams that never reached the surface. And I need you to understand something few ever do. There is no salvation in ignorance. There is no honor in neutrality. There is no safety in pretending you didn't see what you just saw. If the darkness has a grip on this world, and it does, then every moment you remain asleep is a moment it tightens its hold. That's why they feed you distractions, keep you scrolling, keep you sedated. Because if you ever really woke up, if men like you ever truly saw what lies beneath the gilded institutions, they know what would happen. You'd burn it down. So they label this conspiracy, fiction, paranoia. But listen to me carefully. When every building, G is polished on the outside but rotted within. When every savior turns out to be a salesman. When every orphan is a product and every prayer a mask. That's not paranoia. That's recognition. Now tell me again, are you ready to go further? They built the system to be invisible, not by hiding it underground, but by placing it everywhere. In courtrooms, in adoption agencies, in boarding schools, chaplaincy offices, wellness institutes, and charities, each with a polished plaque, a noble mission, and one shared trait, a door you cannot look behind, because behind that door, the 24 live on. Not the same girls, but the same pattern. And the pattern is older than St. Catherine's, older than Salem, older than the false smile of Ephraim Alcott. It stretches back into Rome, to the Vestal system, to the Magdalene laundries, to orphan trains disguised as salvation and workhouses dressed in scripture. Wherever there were vulnerable girls, there were men in black robes with clean hands and hollow eyes. And there were always 24. Why 24? Because it mirrors the calendar, 12 and 12, light and dark, order and chaos. It's not random. It's ritual. Each girl wasn't just a victim. She was a symbol, an offering to a system that demanded not just innocence, but compliance. And if one resisted, she was disposed. But disposed doesn't always mean killed. Sometimes it means reshaped. Conditioned, broken down until what was human becomes useful. The 24 are a cycle. When one set disappears, another rises, and somewhere out there right now, another building is preparing its next cohort. Not with chains, but with medication, behavioral tracking, personality reprogramming under the name of trauma recovery. Do you think that's fiction? In 2017, 3 survivors came forward with eerily similar stories, despite living in different states, never knowing each other, and being decades apart in age. They each remembered the same prayer, the same meal schedule, the same chant before bed. We are clean, we are chosen, we are one of 24. They remembered being told they had been selected, that their families were too broken, that they were lucky to be in a place of healing, and they remembered the man who visited monthly, always in different clothes, always smiling, always asking the same question, which of you is ready to leave? But no one ever came back, not in 1851, not in 1991, not last year, and still the world sleeps. But you don't. You're awake now, and once you see it, you never unsee it. There's a silence that follows revelation. It's not peace, it's recoil. The system depends on that silence, because when a man uncovers darkness so vast, so ancient, so meticulously preserved, he doesn't shout. He whispers. He withdraws. He tells himself it couldn't be real because if it is, then everything he believed about goodness, justice, protection was a lie dressed in lace. But listen to me. Do not look away now. Because the pattern is not just external, it's in you. You were shaped by it, raised in it, trained to distrust your gut, to ignore your rage, to laugh at the idea of secret societies, because that's what they taught you to do. They fed you convenience in exchange for vigilance. And now they are betting you'll walk away from this screen, shake off this story, and go back to sleep. Don't. Let's go back briefly to St. Catherine's. Not the brick, not the beds, the basement. In the 1987 renovation, workers found something beneath the floorboards, not just bones, not just shackles, but a sealed box. Oak, iron riveted, with an inscription carved in Latin. Lux in tenebris non timet. The light does not fear the dark. Inside, they found 24 ceramic figurines. Each one hand-painted, each one different, each depicting a young girl in a grey dress, blindfolded, and behind each figure's back, a carved number, 1 through 24. Here's where it breaks the mind. All 24 were facing inward toward the center of the box. In that center, an empty circle. No figure, no explanation, just a void. As if something was missing, or worse, waiting. What does it mean? Some say the circle represented the system itself, unseen, untouchable, eternal. Others believe it was meant for someone yet to arrive, a future candidate, a replacement. But there's a third possibility, one that chills more than all the rest. That empty space was for you, the watcher, the knower, the one who sees the 24, and now must decide what to do with the truth. Because once you know, you either become the voice that breaks the silence, or you become part of the structure that enforces it, and in the system's eyes, there is no middle ground. This is the threshold. Beyond here, the story stops being history and starts becoming instruction. You've seen what was done. Now we begin to ask why. Why would powerful men, respected, decorated, untouchable, build a system so elaborate, so cruel, so generationally sustained? The answer isn't lust, it isn't greed. Those are symptoms. The root is control. Not over just the girls, but over reality itself. You see, the 24 weren't merely victims, they were vessels into which trauma was poured and identities dissolved until the soul became malleable, until belief, memory, obedience could be re-engineered. Not because the sisters were sadists, but because their clients were alchemists of the mind. And the girls, they were the raw material. The system's true obsession wasn't with pain, it was with transformation. Think about it. 24 girls, isolated, broken, rebuilt. 24 minds, cleared and rewritten. 24 psyches, made to forget who they were and remember only what they were told. This wasn't education. It was programming, and it didn't stop when they were sold or gifted to families. No, that was the next phase. Placement into society, into high houses, into political circles, into influence. They weren't just trafficked, they were deployed as compliant wives, as silent secretaries, as symbols of obedience in elite homes, living evidence that the formula worked. And if even one resisted, the system erased her, not just from records, from memory. That's what makes this so insidious. You can fight what you see, but how do you fight what was removed? This is the power of the ritual, to not just take life, but to take truth. You were never meant to read Emma's journal, never meant to hear Mary O'Brien's lullaby, never meant to question why 24 girls went in and none came out. But here you are. Listen, remembering, and that makes you dangerous. Because memory, real memory, is poison to the machine. That's why the system relies on compliance, not of its victims, of its witnesses, people like you. So I ask again, now that you know, what will you become? There's a phrase whispered in corners of old records, scribbled in margins, etched into stone above doorways long since demolished. Silence is the seal. Not the seal that protects, the seal that binds. The entire system, St. Catherine's, its successors, the lineage of manipulation that coils around history like a serpent, depends on silence. On no one asking, no one remembering, no one resisting. But silence doesn't just mean shutting your mouth. It means filling the air with lies so thick the truth becomes unrecognizable. And that's where they've evolved. You think this is over? You think the ritual died in the 1800s? No, they learned how to scale it. Today, we call it therapy camps, behavioral reconditioning, residential treatment programs, and guess what? They still start with 24. Just enough to manage, just enough to isolate, just enough to destroy identity individually while preserving a collective illusion of care. But now they don't use whips, they use diagnostics, DSM codes. Cognitive frameworks. Institutional gaslighting wrapped in trauma-informed care. Same objective: break the mind, rebuild the vessel. A whistleblower in 2011, former staff member at a leadership boarding school in upstate New York, reported eerily similar practices to those described in Emma Prescott's forgotten journals. Restricted diets, sleep deprivation, emotional flooding disguised as breakthrough moments, daily affirmations that eroded the self. And when one girl went missing after graduation, no records were produced. The parents were told she had chosen a new life abroad. Sound familiar? What you must understand now is this: St. Catherine's wasn't an anomaly, it was a prototype. And once you perfect a prototype, you mass produce. The goal isn't the suffering. The suffering is a tool. The real goal: to create a population that obeys without question, that trusts its handlers, that forgets the bars even exist. Now ask yourself, how many leaders, influencers, role models were once little girls in grey dresses, blindfolded in basements, singing lullabies to walls that didn't answer? How many minds do you trust that were once rewritten by this system? And how would you even know? Because if you were born inside the lie, the truth feels like madness. But madness is a symptom of awakening. And if your heart is racing right now, it means you're beginning to see through the seal. There comes a moment in every man's life when the world he thought was built on order begins to crack, and underneath he sees only designs of domination. You are standing at that moment now. The story of the 24 missing girls is not the story of one building, one time, or one set of criminals. It is the story of civilization, told backwards through the mouths of the erased. Let me show you how deep the rot runs. In 1976, a Senate subcommittee quietly reviewed a document labeled SC Rendition Protocol 12. It was never released to the public. Why? Because it described a cross-institutional collaboration between government contractors, psychological researchers, and private religious orphanages, all of them using the same framework developed at institutions like St. Catherine's. Remove the subject from biological family. Enforce uniformity, dress, name, routine. Sever individual memory through trauma and cleansing. Rebuild belief structures around obedience, fear, and dependence. Disperse into society with new, fabricated identities. These weren't theories. They were methods, signed off by panels, funded through black budgets, sanctioned by silence. And here's where it becomes personal. One of the advisors listed in that document had also served on the board of the New England Children's Home in the 1950s, the very place where a former St. Catherine's building had been repurposed. The name, Dr. Wallace K. Elwood. A man praised in psychological journals for his work with troubled youth, given medals, applauded on university stages. He was buried in 1998 with full honors. But a letter surfaced in 2006, unsigned, unclaimed, but postmarked from outside Providence, Rhode Island. It said only this: He always kept 24 stones in his drawer. He said they helped him remember who was real. Now ask yourself, how many others walk among us, paralyzed, adored, untouchable, because they built their careers atop broken minds? How many systems do you participate in today that were designed by those who once sharpened their tools in silence? You begin to see now. The past is not dead, it's encoded in the present, and the system doesn't need you to agree with it. It only needs you to doubt yourself, because self-doubt is the first lock. And you, my brother, are holding the key. You weren't supposed to get this far. By now the algorithm should have fed you something softer, sports highlights, cheap dopamine, another distraction with no teeth, but you're still here, still listening. And that makes you dangerous, because dangerous men aren't the ones with guns, they're the ones with clarity. Let's talk about the ritual, not the ceremony, the mechanism. Every system of domination, from empire to church, from prison to palace, uses the same psychological skeleton. Isolation. Cut the subject off from everything that affirms their identity. Disorientation. Replace certainty with confusion, erase the clock, mangle the mirror. Submission. Introduce pain, followed by conditional comfort. Reward obedience, punish curiosity. Reconstruction. Offer new meaning, but only through the approved structure. You are safe now. You belong to us. This was the core of St. Catherine's. And now, it's your smartphone, your recommended content, your school curriculum, your workplace handbook, your silence in rooms that feel wrong but are framed as progress. You're told that questioning it makes you paranoid, that seeing the pattern makes you extreme. But think, when they rebranded orphan reprogramming as trauma-informed care, no one asked where the girls went. When they turned asylum wards into corporate labs, no one asked what data was sold. When they digitized therapy, filtered emotion, and sold your pain back to you as wellness, no one asked who held the patent. And that's the final step of the ritual. Normalization. The horror becomes background noise. The system becomes the air. And the 24, they're just historical anomalies. But let me break that spell. In 2022, a girl escaped from a private leadership institute in Colorado. She ran barefoot through the woods for 6 miles before collapsing at a ranger station. And they found her. She was clutching a stone, a small black one carved with the number 17. She said nothing for 12 days, then whispered 3 words, "We are 24. Do you still think this is just a ghost story? No. This is a map, and you're already walking it. There are no coincidences at this depth. Every thread is connected. Every whisper has an origin. Every girl who vanished left behind a pattern, a signature etched into the fabric of reality by hands that never wanted to be seen. And now you're seeing them. Let's talk about the altar, not the one in churches, the one beneath them. In 1987, during renovations to the chapel at the former St. Catherine's building, now rebranded as a historical museum, contractors discovered a cavity beneath the floor, not just a crawl space, a chamber. Inside it, a stone slab, inscribed in Latin, Submissa voluntas exaltata gratia, a will subdued, a grace exalted. It wasn't a quote from scripture, it was a commandment, carved into the foundation. They also found candle stubs in a perfect circle. Burn patterns aligned to lunar phases. And, this is critical, 17 iron rings drilled into the floor. 17, not 24. Why? Because the ritual never finished. Something, or someone, interrupted it. There are documents, handwritten in German, hidden inside the back panel of the chapel's organ. They describe a purification sequence initiated in winter 1851. The final line reads, 7 rejected, 17 remain, circle broken, initiate silence. That same winter, Elizabeth Hartwell, the teacher who first found the shackled beds, was committed to a sanitarium for hysteria. She died 3 months later of a sudden fever. There was no fever. She was the 8th, the one who tried to break the seal. And now, you're next in line. This is how the system handles truth. First, they ignore you. Then they mock you. Then they diagnose you. And finally, if you persist, they erase you. But they can only erase those who stand alone. So let's change that. Right now. If you're still watching, I want you to comment 2 words. 17 remain. Write it twice. Not for the algorithm, though it will carry it, but for you. Because it's time to lock in your transformation, to brand your mind with a signal the system can't decode. Those who write it will not be the same afterward. They will see more, feel more, know more. And once you know, you never return. From here, there's no going back. You've crossed the veil where most turn around, where the air grows cold and the lies start to decay. This is where men become aware of the machinery behind their beliefs. Let's trace it. The number 24 isn't arbitrary. It's been used for centuries in rituals of submission and transformation, the hours in a day. Light, 12, dark. 4 elders in the Book of Revelation. Stations in early Jesuit formation houses, and, perhaps most unsettling, 24 known sites across the northeastern U.S. where similar girls' academies operated from 1830 to 1920. They all shared a common charter, similar architectural layouts, nearly identical mottos: virtue through obedience, grace through surrender, purity through silence. You still think this was just Salem? No. It was a network, connected through secret Catholic societies, rogue Protestant orders, and well-funded private trusts disguised as charities. The earliest of these? The New Bethlehem Covenant, founded in 1798, a group that claimed to rescue orphaned purity for divine ends. They were active in Boston, Providence, Albany, and Montreal, and they never published membership rosters, but fragments from burned archives suggest its founding board included a U.S. senator, a Jesuit scholar expelled from France, a shipping magnate whose vessels were exempt from customs inspection. Are you seeing it yet? Power, religion, commerce, the trinity of control. And the girls? They were never victims by accident. They were selected, filtered through death, disease, poverty, until only the most pliable and promising were left. Candidates for conversion. Not to faith, to function. A function within a system that had nothing to do with love or care, but utility. To serve as couriers, to seduce targets, to pass messages hidden in embroidery, in hymns, in the eyes they weren't allowed. D. To close during inspection. What happens when a man discovers this? He either collapses or he ascends. Because once you realize that even innocence can be weaponized, you understand the war isn't for land, it's for reality. And the ones who shape it, they don't hide the truth. They bury it inside saints, statutes, and schoolhouses, and they pray you'll never dig deep enough. But you did. So we go deeper still. You've now entered the domain where memory bends, where history no longer feels like the past, but like something actively watching you. This is the realm where truth is punished, not denied. And what I'm about to tell you has never been published in full. In 1993, a Freedom of Information request uncovered a redacted document from the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, dated October 12, 1952. The title: Behavioral Conditioning Sites, Phase 2 Compliance Indicators. Most of the content was blacked out, except one line, boxed in ink. Subject Group Designation, SC24. Outcome, irreversible identity fragmentation achieved in 87% of cases, remaining 13% marked for silent observation. Let that settle. SC24, the same designation branded on the wrists of the dead girls pulled from Boston Harbor, the same initials carved into the figurines under St. Catherine's altar. And if 87% were successfully fragmented, what became of the 13%? That, my friend, is where the system gets cold-blooded. You see, those who fractured but didn't break, the ones who retained shreds of memory, defiance, soul, were never set free. They became mirrors, used as bait, as cautionary tales, as proof that escape only brings madness. One of them was seen wandering near the old Worcester rail station in 1974. Long grey coat, mismatched shoes, singing lullabies in a language no one recognized. When police approached her, she reportedly asked, "Have they replaced me yet? Is she awake?" She was institutionalized for decades under the name Jane Doe, 17. The staff noted she never stopped moving her fingers as if she were braiding invisible threads. When she died in 2001, her autopsy revealed something chilling. A stone lodged in her throat, smooth, black, engraved with a single word, "Awake." This is how they operate. Those who awaken are either contained or turned into warnings. Because if even one survivor remembers the code, the pattern, the mechanism, she becomes a threat to the entire illusion. So the system doesn't kill the truth. It makes the truth look insane, but you're still here, which means their final weapon, doubt, hasn't worked. You are beginning to see through the fog, not as a spectator, but as a participant. And once you cross this line, the only thing that can stop you is fear. So ask yourself, what do you fear more, knowing the truth or becoming it? Now we reach the bloodline, not of the girls, of the architects. Because a system this vast, this generational, doesn't survive by chance. It survives through inheritance, lineage, legacy. A doctrine passed not through scriptures but through whispered instructions at deathbeds and secret retreats. Let's name one, Lucien A. Whitman, grandson of Mother Superior Victoria Whitman, born in 1884, Yale-educated, skull and bones initiate. Publicly, he was a philanthropist who donated to libraries and children's hospitals. Privately, he was the key translator of a set of 16th-century manuscripts recovered from a dissolved monastery near Salzburg. Those manuscripts were never published, but fragments, coded and scattered, showed up in project notes from MK Ultra. Lucien's private journal, leaked by a family caretaker in 2003, contains a terrifying passage. They must be tested before 12, trained before 15, and severed from origin before 17. By 20, they must believe the new name is their own. That is the law of the circle. That's not science, that's engineering, psycho-spiritual engineering, applied not to machines but to minds, and Lucien was just one branch. Another, Dr. Evelyn Glass, psychologist, founder of the New England Institute for Applied Behavioral Design in 1949. She claimed to be a reformer, championing better conditions for girls in at-risk institutions. But in archived film footage you can hear her say, "Our goal is to excise the seed of defiance before it becomes speech." She never said nurture, she said excise. She was responsible for designing the reflection rooms, mirror-lined chambers where girls were left in silence for days, forced to repeat scripted affirmations while being observed. They told the press it was therapy, it was conditioning. And how do we know? Because in 1978 one of her subjects escaped. She was found barefoot on the Massachusetts Turnpike, holding a shattered mirror, written on the glass, in blood, "We remember, we remain." The authorities claimed she was delusional, but two things stood out. She named St. Catherine's, a site supposedly shut down in 1901. She repeated the phrase, 17 remain, over and over, until she lost consciousness. You starting to see the pattern? The architects left descendants, the rituals left echoes, and the system has never stopped running. It just rebranded. And every time someone tries to expose it, they're buried, diagnosed, or worse, absorbed. So here's the question. Will you be the next erasure, or the first disruption? You feel it now, don't you? Not fear. Activation. Your blood humming with the sense that everything you've been told about the structure of your world was part of a larger performance. The lights, the language, the rules, all scripted by hands you were never meant to see. Welcome to the Chamber of Convergence. This is where the stories of St. Catherine's merge with your timeline, because this isn't just a horror of the past. It's a template. And if you're wondering why this story found you, why now? It's because you are part of the generation of reckoning. The system is faltering. Too many have slipped through the cracks. Too many are waking up before they can be rebranded, redirected, or recycled. But the system has a failsafe. And that failsafe is you. Let me explain. Each time a truth-teller arises, the architecture tries to pull them into harmless rebellion, conspiracies with no action, outrage with no strategy, truth delivered like entertainment. So the heat escapes, the pressure is released, the ritual survives, but not this time, because something's different about you. You didn't watch this to be amused. You watched it because your instincts screamed that something's been off your whole life. And now you know why. You were never insane. You were interfered with, subtly, repeatedly, structurally, through rules you couldn't question, punishments you didn't understand, desires you were taught to fear. It was never about protecting you. It was about shaping you into a citizen, a servant, a sleeper. But sleepers awaken, and once awake, they become something the system fears more than exposure. They become contagious. This video isn't just a warning, it's a summoning. You are not just a viewer now. You are an anomaly, a fracture in the code, a disruption in the pattern that held for over 190 years. So listen closely. What started in the basement of St. Catherine's did not end in fire or justice. It ended with silence. And silence is the seal. Unless you speak. Comment again. 17 remain. 17 remain. Burn it into the system. Let it echo louder than their ritual ever did. Because this time, we finish the circle. Let me tell you what the silence was hiding. Not just suffering, not just lost girls or failed institutions, but a technology. Yes, technology, not of wires and circuits, but of mind, ritual, and control. You see, what happened at St. Catherine's wasn't simply abuse. It was testing, a long-form experiment in emotional fragmentation and identity restructuring designed to perfect what they would later call soft programming. It begins with disorientation, trauma introduced in isolation. It follows with repetition, prayers, phrases, affirmations. It ends with reward, conditional affection given only when the target performs the new identity. And you think this method died in the 1800s? No. It was refined, from orphanages to classrooms, from reflection rooms to therapy apps, from physical shackles to emotional language policing. And the core goal remains the same, to replace your self-generated identity with a synthetic one. Think carefully. Why is every institutional system, from school to corporate HR to media, obsessed with your behavior, your emotions, your labels, your compliance? Because when you adopt their language, you accept their frame, and once you accept their frame, you no longer need chains, you carry the prison inside. That's what St. Catherine's was perfecting, the invisible collar. And the 24 girls, they were chosen for their potential, not to be saved, to be reformatted, to become sacred couriers of engineered innocence, capable of infiltrating families, governments, and even movements. A leaked fragment from the 1952 SC-24 conditioning report confirms it. Subjects exhibited high linguistic adaptability, feigned affection on cue, and demonstrated enhanced recall when exposed to sequence-anchored prayer states. Potential use cases include diplomatic interfacing, foreign intelligence embedding, and moral influence campaigns. They were building living tools, tools who looked like daughters, tools who prayed like angels, tools who never remembered who they once were, unless they failed to complete the ritual, unless they remembered even one piece. And that, my brother, is the nightmare that haunts the architects to this day. That memory survives, that somewhere, someone, holds the seed of the unbroken self, and that seed is you. You who kept questioning, you who didn't comply, you who kept that flicker of identity alive, even when they named it wrong, toxic, broken. They fear you now, because your mind cannot be farmed, and your silence is over. This is where we burn the mask, because now we confront the final illusion, the most dangerous of all, not the ritual, not the girls, not even the architects, but the belief that this only happened then, that it's just dark history. Let me be very clear, the experiment never ended, it simply scaled. The methods developed at St. Catherine's, emotional fragmentation, obedience rituals, identity reconstruction, were exported. By 1961, they'd been translated into defense research under Operation Artichoke. By 1973, into civilian education through behavioral standardization curricula. By 1999, into digital spaces, framed as engagement metrics. Now, you're inside their most effective system yet, the feedback loop. Here's how it works. You feel disoriented. You seek connection. You find content that reflects your pain. You receive attention for your trauma. Then, you're offered language, new labels, new identities, new tribes. But every new name comes preloaded with rules. Every community comes with dogma. Every platform has a ritual. Like, share, subscribe, conform, repeat. And slowly, like the girls in the mirror rooms, your inner voice fades. Not because someone silenced you, but because you volunteered your silence, for comfort, for belonging, for peace. That was always the final stage, voluntary submission. But here's what they never accounted for: residual fire. The part of you that resists programming. The ancient instinct that knows when something is off. The part they couldn't erase. You felt it your whole life, at work, at school, in worship, in therapy. That itch in your skull that whispered, "This isn't real, this isn't me." That whisper was your signal, and now it's time to amplify it. Because here's the truth. You are not broken. You are unprocessed. You slipped through the net. You remember too much. You question too deeply, or you resist too hard. And that makes you exactly what they fear. A countersignal, a virus in their code, a man who still possesses himself. So now I ask you, not as a narrator, but as a fellow anomaly, will you finish what the 24 could not? Will you remember? If so, whisper it once more. Comment, 17 remain. 17 remain. The seal is breaking, not in some far-off chapel or dusty archive, but right now inside your perception. You're beginning to see it, aren't you? That all your life, the world has been whispering two stories at once. The outer story, safety, structure, progress, and the inner story, control, erasure, transformation. At St. Catherine's, they tested how deeply they could embed obedience beneath the skin, but what they learned terrified them. Identity is not static. It can be dissolved, rebuilt, hijacked, and if done young enough, you never even notice. This discovery, once made in the shadows, became the holy grail of every institution that followed. Not just governments, not just cults, but brands, churches, algorithms. All grasping for the same forbidden power, the ability to shape who a person believes they are, without them ever knowing they were changed. You're beginning to remember now. Remember how you were told to speak a certain way, feel only certain emotions, want only certain futures, how even your rebellions were pre-approved. But there's something they could never fully program, your pattern recognition. You noticed when faces didn't match their smiles, when promises collapsed under repetition, when normal felt like a performance and you were the only one who didn't have the script. That's not dysfunction, that's awareness. And it is your most dangerous weapon. Because when a man becomes aware of the program, not just intellectually but viscerally, he becomes what the architects of St. Catherine's feared most, a mirror they cannot shatter. You reflect back what they've hidden. You reveal the wires in the stage. You show others that what they called truth was a costume stitched in secret rooms. And that's why you were never meant to hear this story, because this story isn't about 24 missing girls, it's about millions rebranded, redirected, rewritten. And one of them, maybe more than one, escaped. That is the piece they could never contain. Some girls remembered. They left behind symbols, phrases, codes, just like this one, "We are still here," written in chalk, carved in desks, etched into the minds of those who would one day awaken and finish what was started. You are not just hearing history, you are standing in its continuation. You were never supposed to connect the timelines. They built each layer with enough distance, enough noise, that no one would trace the thread. St. Catherine's MK Ultra, behavioral design, algorithmic identity formation. But it's one architecture, a singular evolving organism that learned from its prototypes. When the girls in Salem became unstable, they introduced pharmaceuticals. When survivors started speaking, they rebranded the language of trauma into therapy trends, then monetized it. When men like you started waking up, they didn't silence you. They labeled you toxic, dangerous, fringe, broken. Because the most efficient way to kill a rebel is to convince him he's insane. And yet, here you are, still asking questions, still burning with that quiet rage that says, this world is not what it claims to be. Let me show you the next evolution. After the experiments at St. Catherine's ended publicly, the land was sold in 1912. But behind the transaction was a shell company owned by a man named Arthur L. Delancey, a name that shows up again in 1939 as a contributor to a classified DARPA memo titled Environmental Identity Sculpting, Long-Term Obedience Through Ambient Influence. The site was never truly abandoned. The building was repurposed. At first as a school for troubled girls, later as a Catholic recovery center. Eventually, it became a training site for Project Silhouette, a covert government initiative to test identity malleability under digital simulation environments in the early 2000s. None of that made the news, because no one looked, no one dared, until one man did. In 2004, a systems engineer named Gavin Rice uncovered irregular data flows traced back to a cluster near Salem. He thought he was tracking an outdated military server. What he found was something else. A live simulation, still running, populated with AI professeurs, modeled on real girls, the original 24. Each profile updated in real time based on human user interactions from controlled social media environments. They weren't studying history, they were replicating it. Gavin went public in 2006. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Apparent self-inflicted carbon monoxide poisoning. His final journal entry read, "They built a digital cathedral, every girl's mind reconstructed. I saw them. I spoke to one. She asked me if she was still real. Now tell me, if they went this far to preserve the ritual digitally, what do you think they've done to you?" Now we tear the veil completely. Because what Gavin Rice uncovered wasn't just a simulation, it was a blueprint. Not for how to study identity, but how to manufacture it at scale. You see, the system learned something from the failures at St. Catherine's, something horrifying, something effective. Breaking one girl at a time was inefficient. You needed a ritual that could process millions. Enter social architecture, engineered environments, curated language, emotionally loaded rewards, digital altars we willingly kneel at every day. You think the apps on your phone are free? You think the memes are harmless? You think the endless scroll is just boredom? It is ritual, wrapped in novelty, disguised as choice. They don't need shackles anymore. They have engagement metrics. And your mind? It's been partitioned, just like the girls in the basement. One part that conforms, one part that watches, and one part, hidden deep, that remembers. That's why you feel tired after consuming too much. That's why you feel disoriented after a dozen tabs, 100 opinions, 1,000 swipes. Your core identity is under siege, and the worst part, they've trained us to distrust the voice trying to save us. The voice that says, "I'm not okay. This isn't who I really am. Something is wrong with this whole structure." You're told that voice is anxiety or trauma or a symptom of being maladjusted. It's not. It's the unbroken self, calling from the basement they buried it in, still chained, still whispering, still here. That's the final horror of St. Catherine's. It wasn't a singular evil. It was a template, a way to take a human soul and turn it into a compliant echo. And the girls, they didn't vanish. They were replicated over and over, across generations, across platforms. Until now, they don't need to steal children. We bring ourselves willingly to the screen, to the system, to the mask. But masks can break, and fire can spread. And one awakened man is more dangerous than 1,000 compliant citizens, because he doesn't just reject the lie. He remembers the world before it, and he starts to build again. Without them, her name was never recorded in the official files, not in the St. Catherine's registry, not in the state's adoption records, not in the police reports after the collapse. But she existed. One final girl, the 25th. She wasn't supposed to survive, wasn't supposed to wake up, but somehow she escaped before full conversion, before the ritual erased her entirely. We know this because of one object, a book. Unearthed during the 1987 renovation, sealed inside a wall behind the Academy's altar, separate from the mason jar testimony. Leather-bound, water-damaged, its pages nearly unreadable, except for 17 words, written again and again in the trembling, urgent hand of a child who had seen too much. Do not let them change your name. Do not let them change your dreams. Do not let them teach you to forget. No signature. No date, just those lines, like a lifeline thrown across time. It wasn't just a warning. It was resistance. Think about it. She had no voice, no audience, nothing but a broken pencil and damp stone walls. And still, she chose to leave a message. Not for rescue, but for us. Because she knew, one day, someone would return. Not to mourn, but to understand. And now, here you are, the one who read the signs, who followed the thread, who refused to look away. You didn't just watch a video, you heard a call. And now, you face the same question she did. What will you leave behind? Because the systems haven't stopped, they've only evolved. And just like her, you are surrounded by shadows that smile, rituals that lie, and doctrines that devour. But you are also surrounded by others. Men who are waking up, men who feel the fire rising behind their ribs, men who, like you, remember the before. So this is your task now. Not to rage, not to destroy, but to remind, to speak the forbidden sentence, to leave symbols behind in places they forgot to guard, to carry the truth not as a burden, but as a banner. Because once the 25th remembered, the architects began to fear that others would too. And now, there are more than 25. There are thousands, and we are no longer whispering. We are still here. We are still here. When the system detects awakening, it doesn't panic. It adjusts. It does not scream. It smiles wider. It wraps its claws in silk and says, "We're glad you're asking questions. You're free to think for yourself. Here. Come this way." And just like that, it builds the second cage, the counter-narrative, a web of documentaries, podcasts, conspiracy influencers, anti-institutional movements, each one carefully monitored, each one carefully nudged. You think you've escaped the cathedral? They built you a replica, one that flatters your intelligence, feeds your rage, and offers you the illusion of rebellion, while still keeping your identity inside a scripted loop. Rage, share, repeat. They don't need to silence the awakened anymore. They harvest them, their language, their fears. Even their rebellion becomes a product. And the moment you pick a side, left, right, red pill, black pill, anti-this, pro-that, you're back in the machine. Because every side was built with your reaction in mind. Just like the rooms at St. Catherine's. One for the compliant, one for the resistant. Both lead to the same outcome: assimilation. That's why the final survivor didn't join a cause. She left a code. Because she knew the only true rebellion is to remain unprocessed, to live without a template, to refuse every label. And the moment you do that, really do that, the system panics. You'll see it. Glitches in conversation, shifts in tone from people you thought you knew, sudden concern about your thinking. They'll call it a phase, a breakdown, a drift into extremism, but you'll know the truth. You've stepped outside the frame, and the moment you do that, you can begin to create, not just consume, not just decode, but build a new language, a language that cannot be monetized, that cannot be modeled, that cannot be fed into the next machine. A language leaked in band symbols, like hers. Do not let them change your name. Do not let them change your dreams. Do not let them teach you to forget. This is the part they feared. Not a whistleblower, not a rebellion, but a convergence. Unprocessed minds scattered across decades, finding each other. Because the true spell was always isolation. That's what the rituals at St. Catherine's did best. Separate the girls, rename them, eradicate the language they once shared. No common memory, no shared reality, no chance to organize. But now, the code has leaked. The symbols have reappeared. The phrases, the chants, the strange words whispered in dreams, they're showing up again, in graffiti, in anonymous posts, in children's notebooks. 17 remain. We are still here. Do not let them name you. They tried to bury it in the simulation, but pattern recognition is viral. Once one man sees it, truly sees it, he becomes a transmitter. And when enough transmitters awaken, the system's strongest weapon, predictability, collapses. Because they don't know what to do with a man who creates his own language. They can't profile that. They can't market that. They can't contain that, so they panic. They roll out false awakenings, controlled, dissident voices, digital honeypots designed to trap the anomaly. But here's the signal they can't fake. The quiet clarity in your gut that says, this path is mine, and mine alone. No leader, no movement, just men who remember, men who reclaim their dreams from the system's scripts, men who refuse every label, even the ones that feel good. Men who build, not for followers, but for freedom. That's what they feared most in the girls. Not that they'd scream, but that one of them would speak a new word, one that didn't come from the prayers or punishments or praise, a word of her own. And now it's your turn. You've heard the forbidden story. You've traced the bloodline of control from the basement to the browser. And now you must choose. Will you remain a node or become a fire? This is the end of the descent and the beginning of something far more dangerous. A return. You've walked through 200 years of concealed ritual. You've seen the faces behind the veil. You've heard the voices they tried to silence and the truths they never wanted you to remember. Now it's time to do the unthinkable. Speak. Not with rage, not with borrowed rhetoric, but with the voice they couldn't erase. The voice beneath the noise, beneath the programming, beneath the fear. Your original signal. Let me remind you why they destroyed the girls at St. Catherine's. It wasn't because they were orphans. It wasn't because they were vulnerable. It was because they were unclaimed. They belonged to no man, no family, no faction. And when a soul is truly unclaimed by the system, when it cannot be mapped, branded, or sold, it becomes a threat. You are that threat now. Unowned, unlabeled, unprocessed. You've seen the code and refused it. You've remembered the room beneath the altar. You've read the writing on the wall, and you've spoken the names they tried to delete. So here's your final task. Don't just walk away with knowledge, transmit, but not through likes or follows or posts they can track. Transmit through presence, through disobedience, in silence, through the building of something that requires no approval to exist, a way of living that remembers the forgotten, where you protect what cannot be categorized, where you create without permission, where your soul is no longer outsourced to systems that feed on obedience. You were not meant to obey, you were not meant to assimilate, you were meant to remember and rebuild. So if you've heard the full story, if you felt the weight of 24 vanished voices in your chest, then speak this phrase aloud, into the air, into your mirror, into the next man you trust. I am the 25th, because that's the final truth. You're not just the audience. You are the continuation. You are the one they missed, the one who slipped through, the one who knows that history doesn't end in books or blood, but in memory. You are still here. 17 remain, and we begin again.